Oh, yes. We're live. Fourth time lucky. We almost didn't get live. For some reason there's something wrong with my phone. But as you guys can see, I'm here with Dr. Adam Collins. We're at Surrey University, where he is the program leader. Is that
program lead, yeah, for nutrition and our MSc in nutrition.
Excellent. So we're going to get into a bit more of what Dr. Adam's about in a second. But first of all, for those that are watching, could you just let me know where you're listening from and if you can hear me? If you can hear me, hit like, because the more that you hit like, the more people will see this video, guys. This is really important. So there's 5 people watching right now. Can you hear us? Really important. Hit like, and that way, there we go. We've got Carmi Neal saying that he can hear us. Excellent. The more people that like, the more people that are going to see these videos, because you know how the Facebook algorithms work. The more engagement we have, the better, guys. So there we go. We've got Steve Doe. Excellent. Thanks very much, guys. So let's get straight into it. Dr. Adam, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself and why you have a specific research interest in intermittent fasting?
Okay. Yeah. So my background is nutrition. So I've been qualified for 20 years. And been here at Surrey for the last 12 years. I've been running the MSc and undergrad nutrition program. But my area of interest is really energy metabolism, body composition, and that sort of got me into intermittent energy restriction, mainly because myself and a PhD student were jointly interested in it, and so we undertook a 3-year project on it as part of her PhD. And really examined some of the metabolic effects of intermittent energy restriction, and then that sort of led on to other things that have spiralled out of that in terms of interests and obviously my involvement with you. Yeah.
So as you guys could hear, really highly qualified, loads of experience, and has a very specific interest in intermittent fasting. And yeah, so we actually came in contact last year. Adam very kindly went over my book, The 2 Meal Day, and said that I was talking sense most of the time.
He was.
And we've since done quite a few events together, and with Damien for Form Nutrition. So what's going to happen is we're going to talk about a few different elements of intermittent fasting. You've heard me talk about it many times before, but it's really great to get Adam's in-depth knowledge. And then I've got some questions that I'm going to ask, and if you guys have any good questions, we might answer them if we have time. So again, if you're enjoying this, please hit like right now. The more people that hit like, the more people are going to see this video, guys, which is really important. So I think we'll start with what is intermittent fasting, but more importantly, what is the history of intermittent fasting? How long have we been looking at it in a kind of research sense?
Yeah, from a research sense, it's been fairly recent, but I suppose the observations of intermittent fasting have been for the last 100 years or so.
Yeah.
So there's been lots of religious practices around fasting, Ramadan being a prime example of that. There's also been observations from sort of man-made fasting, if we see, like the Dutch winter famine and things related to war, usually, where you've created sort of massive energy deprivation, or the Irish famine, which has had its anniversary this year.
Oh, is it?
So things like that, observations of sort of disasters in terms of that has increased our awareness. But from a research point of view, it sort of stems from animal research, where the observation in animals is if you restrict an animal in terms of energy, then they live longer, or their survival rate improves. And that sort of started to generate hypothesis around whether that was true in humans. But of course, the original work on intermittent fasting started in rodents, particularly with alternate day fasting. So the first model was feed one day, fast the next day, and alternate that across the week. And the observation was in animals that that animal might have lost weight, but there was also other metabolic changes that were happening in those animals as a result of that alternate day fasting. Some beneficial, some detrimental, but we'll come on to that a bit later. So then that sort of led on to human studies, and again, human studies predominantly started with alternate day fasting, but even the alternate day fasting, some were doing total fasts on the fast days, some were doing partial fasts on the fast days, and then More recently, that turned into a more user-friendly 5-2 approach, where you're fasting on 2 days and feeding on the other 5 days. But all of those models sort of showed the same sort of thing, where you got spontaneous energy reduction, so you're eating less food, but also there was a suggestion that there was metabolic differences that were happening.
Yeah. That you don't get from just
that
calorie
you don't
restriction.
necessarily get, or not as clear from calorie restriction.
Yeah.
But the problem with those studies, or the early studies, is even the ones that were comparing continuous energy restriction, which is just eating less every day, to intermittent, was that they didn't control for weight loss. So was it because the people were losing more weight on one regime, or was it other things that were going on? So the study that we ran, and we ran an acute study and a chronic study, but we wanted to eliminate the effect of weight loss.
Yeah.
So we had them on the 2 regimes, so one group was on continuous, one group was on intermittent, and they carried on until they both lost 5% of their body weight, and then we brought them back and we looked at them. So we eliminated the effect of weight. And that sort of showed for the first time that you got some distinct differences, not amazingly distinct, but some distinct differences with intermittent energy restriction.
That's really interesting.
So that's the origins of our research. I mean, the other things that we wanted to also confirm was in our acute study and the outcome measures that we looked at, because in our acute study we wanted to actually definitively know what happens when you fast. Because a lot of these models, particularly the 5-2, which is obviously popular, is extending a fast for like 36 hours in effect, because you're doing a whole 24 hours and then sleeping and waking up the next day. So we wanted to know what was the actual effect of that prolonged fast.
The mechanisms.
What effect is that fast having?
Okay.
And what we're interested in looking at as a showcase is not just what your fasted blood metabolites are, but how you respond to a meal. What's your metabolic response to not just a glucose tolerance test, but to a mixed meal. So those are the sort of outcome measures that we are interested in. How better or worse are you at handling food? Basically, you're handling an insult such as a meal. Yeah. So that's really where we're at.
And then recently, because the 5-2, and recently there's been a lot of research and interest in time-restricted feeding or eating. Yeah. Could you briefly describe that?
Yeah, so that study was completed probably about 2 years ago. At the same time as we were scaling down that study, there was a lot of interest, certainly here, because we have a real expertise in chronobiology here.
Yeah. So that's circadian rhythms.
About circadian rhythms. So there was a lot of crossover, and we had some interest in time-restricted feeding, and so we were looking at it from a perspective of intermittent energy restriction, but it also was of interest to the chronobiologists, because it sort of ties in with the circadian rhythm and entrainment and everything around that. So we did a trial on time-restricted feeding, which is where you restrict the eating window to maybe 8 hours of the day, or basically
it's essentially what the 2 meal day is.
It's effectively creating a fast within a 24-hour period. Yeah. So rather than fast for a whole day, you're fasting for a period of time within the 24 hours. So it's popularised, I suppose, with the 16-8 is often a manifestation of that. So we did a trial looking at that, and that was quite interesting in the sense that people typically lost more weight, and they found it a favourable way of changing their diets just by restricting that eating window. It was a fairly crude study that we did, but it did sort of open the door to other studies that we're planning on going to investigate. We've got 3 PhD students literally starting this week.
Really?
So we've got 2 that are looking at time-restricted feeding, 1 in a patient group, 1 in a normal group, and a 3rd one, which is probably going to look at, that's the one I'm in charge of, looking at other ways of manipulating things around macronutrients in an intermittent or time-restricted way.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So hopefully, because intermittent fasting, I think, was the top diet trend, although it's a way of life, not a diet, of 2017. So hopefully, I get DMs from students who are saying they're trying to research this in their own degrees and their PhDs. So hopefully, as time goes on, there's going to be more and more. But that's really interesting that you've done some very specific research on time restricted eating. So now that we can kind of understand the history of intermittent fasting and time restricted eating, I think it would be good for you to describe essentially the mechanisms of what's happening between the fed and the fasted state. You guys have maybe heard me mention it before, but obviously Adam can give a good in-depth kind of analysis. So yeah, the fed and the fasted state.
Sure, yeah. I mean, a lot of people understand the idea of being fed and they understand the idea of being fasted, but what is the actual definition of fed and fasted? And I suppose if you think of it from a time phase, so when you've had a meal, you transition into that fed stage.
Yeah.
And that fed stage is actually a two-stage process. So you've got your first stage, which is your postprandial stage. And that postprandial stage is the period in which you are digesting, absorbing, partitioning, using that fuel that you've just taken on board in that meal, whether it's carbohydrate, protein, fat.
Roughly how long does that last?
And that lasts about 4 hours.
Okay.
It could take slightly less than 4 hours or more than 4 hours, depending on the person, but also depending on the composition of the meal. Because obviously that all affects the gastric emptying and the efficiency and time it takes. But let's say that takes 4 hours. That's the time it takes for you to actually deal with and take on board that you've just ingested in that meal. But then that doesn't mean that you go from that into your fasted state, because then you move into another phase, which is your post-absorptive state, which, as the name suggests, you've absorbed everything. Now you've got all that circulating around the system, you're in that sort of replete state, you're doing certain priorities in that stage, and using predominantly that fuel that you've just taken on board. And then as that time goes on, and that lasts about 4 hours, you start to shift around the sort of emphasis of one fuel over another. As one fuel starts to run out, you start to use another fuel.
So carbohydrates and fat.
So you're predominantly starting in the fed state with a priority of carbohydrate, and then you transition into fat. But you're always using a mixture of the two. It's just the emphasis shifts from one to the other. As your carbohydrate availability declines, then you start to use your backup fuel as a fat.
Stored energy,
as stored energy, or anything that's circulating around the system.
Okay.
So that's your post-absorptive period. That lasts about 4 hours again.
So we're at 8 hours at this point.
So now we're 8 hours after a meal. And it's only after 8 hours of that meal that you're really truly in that fasted state.
Yeah.
Where you have long ago utilised all that fuel from the meal, and you've started to, in earnest, break down your body stores, particularly your adipose tissue stores, to use that as
fat tissue stores.
Yeah, your fat stores, sorry, and use that predominantly as a fuel.
So after about 8 hours.
So about 8 hours. So if you think of a typical day, and let's say you are traditionally doing breakfast, lunch and dinner, then for most people, the only time of the day where they're actually truly in a fasted state is from about 4 o'clock in the morning to when they wake up and have whatever meal it is, the first meal of that day.
Yeah, and that's if they're only having dinner and not snacking after that.
That's assuming that they stop eating around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. But obviously people don't just eat a meal, they eat things after a meal, and then they have some drinks or alcohol, which obviously contributes as fuel as well. So so you can sort of argue that for the majority of the 24-hour period, people are either in a postprandial state or post-absorptive state.
So to emphasise, the average person, if they are finishing eating at 8 o'clock, which unless you're aware of time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting, probably not, because otherwise why would you decide to suddenly finish eating at 8 o'clock if you're not really sure why you should do that? Then you're in the fasted state for at most 2 or 3 hours, and that's if you're finishing at 8 o'clock. So what would you say, these states are completely natural, the fed and the fasted state. What are the benefits of extending the overnight fast and spending more time in the fasted state?
Yeah, I think the benefit is, from a metabolic point of view, is that if you think you're only dealing with one fuel predominantly all the time, which is carbohydrate, then you're never in a position, under normal circumstances, particularly in the scenario you just described, where you might be eating over a long period of time, where you're having to resource things from somewhere else, like fat stores, or even from your own muscle glycogen, your own liver and muscle glycogen, which is your stores of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
So you're constantly being drip fed fuel all the time, and your body just gets accustomed to that steady supply of its primary fuel, which is carbohydrate
from the food that you're eating,
because you're constantly supplying it all the time.
Yeah.
So the logic says that if you have periods of a time where you're not supplying fuel, and our body is designed in a very efficient way to manage fuels, in the sense that you have the ability to last a long time, over 100 days worth of time without any fuel, because you've got lots of energy stores in the body.
In the form of fat.
In the form of fat, which you're never going to run out of, or even in the form of carbohydrate, which could last you for 24 hours potentially. So you're never really tapping into it. So there is a logic that says, by extending the fast or allowing the body to actually have a transition into that fasted period, or even transition fully into the post-absorptive period, and the later stages of that post-absorptive period is beneficial, because then you get accustomed to being able to use those two fuels. The other reason why it could be problematic if you're not doing that transition all the time is that, yes, you get used to using carbohydrate all the time, but you run the risk of just either never breaking down your body fat stores, or most likely increasing those body fat stores. So you end up creeping up in terms of fatness over time, and particularly
is that a scientific word?
Yeah, creeping up in fatness, or increasing adiposity, to give its technical term. So that you've got this sort of drift upwards in terms of fatness over time, potentially, because you're just constantly in this replete or fed state most of the time.
So a really good analogy that hopefully I'm going to describe as well as my friend did was, if you imagine a sponge that you use to wash up, and when you fill that sponge up with water constantly, you become less good at absorbing the water. I think, and whereas if you let the sponge dry out, you're going to be better absorbing the water. I think, is that a good analogy?
I think that's a good analogy. I mean, the analogy I've shown in my lectures is effectively like buckets. So if you've got a finite number of buckets, and you're constantly got a dripping tap or running tap, eventually all your buckets are going to be full up, and then it starts to spill over. Yeah,
that's a better analogy.
And then you get issues of that spilling over into places where it shouldn't be, so your flooding system,
visceral fat,
and then you start to get build up of visceral fat, and that fat starts to infiltrate into other organs, and so what you're doing, whether it's through giving your body a chance to actually use or empty those buckets, or whether you're increasing the demand of water from the system, like from exercise, you're effectively keeping those buckets in check.
Full, So you have to understand, guys, this is a completely normal thing. As you say, our bodies are designed to go through these periods of fasting, the fasted state and the fed state. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of fear, I think, through intermittent fasting and confusion. But essentially, you're just retraining your body to do something that it's naturally able to do, and that's use both fuel sources. So guys, at this point, if you're enjoying what we're saying, hit like right now. I'm loving listening to Adam. And also do leave your questions, and at the end we may be able to answer your questions. So we've talked about the fed and the fasted state and what are the potential benefits of spending more time in the fasted state, but what would you say are the other benefits of intermittent fasting?
So intermittent fasting it gives you that ability to manage your fuels effectively. So if you're understanding that you are flipping or giving your body a chance to use your stores of fuel, or using your primary fuel and your secondary fuel, then your body gets better at dealing with that. You are able to roll with the punches better, because your body is more flexible, because it can adjust according to circumstances better. Now, whether that is a period of fasting, obviously, because
Yeah.
this is what you're sort of training it to do, but it's also better at dealing with a period of excess,
Yeah.
or it's better at dealing with a period of increased demand, like during exercise. So I think it has a knock-on effect in your efficiencies of processes in the body.
So you're saying basically your body's just going to become more efficient at any kind of food scenario you show it. So if you eat too much one day, it's going to be better at dealing with that food.
Yeah.
But equally, if you don't eat, or if you increase your fast, your body is going to be able to function optimally without the food.
Yeah.
And when it comes to expenditure and exercising, again, you'll be better at using the energy that's there rather than, but equally also the energy that's coming in.
Yeah.
So potentially you're more sensitive to the carbohydrates that you eat, and on top of that, you've got the ability to tap into your fat reserves as well.
That's right. I mean, it's about making the system work as it's intended. I mean, you have a homeostasis, and the homeostasis is to keep you as you are.
Yeah.
So when you have periods where you overindulge, then you can adjust to compensate for that afterwards. Or when you have a period where you are undernourished, then you can compensate for that as well. So that's how your body's designed. But the way in which we're exposed in Western world is that we are constantly got a ready supply of everything all the time.
Yeah.
So we're never really attuned to our body's natural homeostasis. And part of that is to do with obviously fuel management from a metabolic point of view, but it's also centered around how we manage things like appetite control, how we might even manage our spontaneous physical activity, which is also homeostatically controlled.
Yeah.
It's not just behaviourally driven. So all of these things, effectively what you're doing is fine-tuning your body's own homeostasis by doing some form of intermittent fasting.
So that's what I find fascinating, and why I'm so passionate about it, is because essentially, yes, you get the weight loss, which is great, and why most people are getting into intermittent fasting is because of the effective fat loss, but you're essentially making your body more efficient at doing its job, and this is why it becomes a way of life. And like you mentioned there, there's the potential of better appetite control, better utilization of food long term, and then there are health benefits alongside with that. And also Adam mentioned there, but unfortunately our modern environment doesn't promote breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You have to have your cereal at 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is. And then, after you've had your cereal, you've got your mid-morning snack, then you've got your lunch, and you've got your mid-afternoon snack. Yeah. And as you say, this constant drip feeding of food essentially is making your body less efficient at doing its job. So all fasting does is just essentially what I say all the time, it retrains your body to do its job properly. And you've heard it from Adam. That was really good. Yeah. So making your body more metabolically efficient. Yeah. What about the
flexible?
Or flexible, yes, flexible. Yeah, that's it. What about the benefits of the spontaneous calorie reduction?
Yeah, so when you look at the early studies of either alternate day fasting or your 5-2 equivalent, then what was probably the interesting observation at the beginning was that whether you gave them nothing or even a small amount of calories on the fast day, you would think that on the feed day that they would just engorge themselves massively to compensate for the fact they haven't had anything to eat on the previous day. But contrary to what they thought, not only did people not overeat on that fast day, they still ate less on the feed day than they did normally before they even started that regime. So there's something about this recalibration of appetite control, or certainly a spillover effect of that fasting in terms of food or spontaneous energy reduction or spontaneous eating less, which is an observation. I mean, I think the problems with the 5-2 and the alternate day fasting, which is what advocated the 5-2, is it's almost like it's too severe an example of fasting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not sustainable for most people.
Yeah, I mean, it serves a purpose, and people do it like any other diet as a finite way of getting a result, whether it's weight loss or whatever it is, but it's not a sustainable diet. and people really struggle with it. I mean, it is user friendly in the sense that you can try and fit it in around normal social life, because you can fit your feed days around what you're normally doing, but it still requires that discipline and that perseverance to do those days, and it's still a little bit artificial. It's not really the way in which we want people to change their behaviour.
No, exactly.
It's just another finite diet that you can put people on.
Yeah, so that's kind of the difference there between intermittent fasting and time restricted eating. Intermittent fasting, like the 5-2, the alternate day. I mean, time restricted eating is still intermittent fasting, but it's kind of like a little sub branch of intermittent fasting, I guess, where, you know, with the 2 meal day, the 16-8, you're fasting every day. Your body gets used to this process and is tapping into both fat and carbohydrates. Whereas, you know, if you're just doing the 5-2, there's potential that your body never really gets used to, you know, because you're only doing it 2 days a week, because you wouldn't want to only eat 500 calories for more than 2 days per week. Have any of you guys here watching tried the 5-2 or the 16-8? I would love to hear your comments. So you mentioned there about, because it was a study by James Betts that looked at skipping breakfast. Yeah. Or I think actually it's important to emphasize, breakfast just means breaking your fast. So I still eat breakfast, just later. So so there was that whole myth that if you skip your meal first thing in the morning, that you end up overcompensating later in the day. And as you just mentioned, that isn't the case.
Yeah. So in a way, you can sort of understand it when you're doing something severe like the 5-2 or alternate day fasting, that it might have a big impact on your feed days.
Yeah.
But even with the 16-8, and obviously breakfast skipping is sort of in line with the 2 meal day philosophy, where you're creating a time restricted feeding by eliminating the meal. But if we look at James Betts's Bath breakfast study, as it's called, because it's a whole range of projects that are going on, but the main observation from that was that if you take breakfast away, although people might eat more on lunch and dinner, it's still not enough to compensate for the lack of a breakfast. Yeah. So you're still making less energy coming in because you're removing the calories from that breakfast.
And this is what I find quite crazy, is because, well, I think this is why the reason the 2 meal day becomes a way of life is because it feels like you're eating more, and you are eating 2 larger meals, but overall the average person is eating a bit less. And then, but this is then why I don't understand why lots of health practitioners and nutritionists and dietitians are so afraid of intermittent fasting, because on one hand they're all saying we need to eat less, but on the other hand they're saying you cannot skip breakfast, you cannot fast.
I know,
even though it seems to be an effective way.
I know, and I suppose it comes back to sort of the consensus of evidence, which is mainly from observations, to say that when you look at populations and you look at people that are better at managing their weight, they typically eat breakfast. Or people that eat breakfast are better at maintaining weight than people that skip breakfast. But that doesn't tell you the full story, because it doesn't really say what else is going on in their diet. Is it because they're skipping breakfast because they're trying to purposely attempt to not eat as much food, and then failing because they're then eating more food later on in the day? So I don't think it really tells the full picture.
Also, what else is going on in their life? What food are they eating?
Exactly.
Are they sleeping properly? Are they smoking? Are they exercising?
I mean, from a sort of clinical perspective, the idea or the rationale, I suppose, behind having your regular meals and snacks is the logic saying that it's a better way of regulating your appetite because you're eating little and often, rather than splurging on big meals. But I think that has, even before the whole advent of intermittent energy restriction, there is not really that much logic behind that.
It doesn't make any sense.
Because it's just about it's a way of trying to get people to manage what they're eating. But from a physiological point of view, there is no real difference between nibblers and gorgers. If you control the total amount, whether you're having it as 7 mini meals or having it as 2 mega meals, it doesn't really make much difference.
Love a mega meal.
Yeah. So I mean, that was done from the calorimetry studies.
Difference in terms of what though?
in terms of how you respond and how you oxidize that food,
Okay.
how you deal with that fuel. And that was done from the calorimeter studies that were done back in the 1980s. So, you know, there is a little bit of a shaky ground, and there perhaps is a way, and I'm not saying that we need to rewrite all of our clinical practice, but we need to be mindful of new evidence and new approaches of doing things, because it's about what works for a particular subset of people.
Absolutely,
or
yeah.
what works for a particular scenario. And that's not to say that we should just base everything anecdotally, but I think there's enough evidence now emerging as this being a valid way of manipulating or managing people's diets.
Because for me, you know, I have eaten 6-7 meals in a day, and I was hungry all the time, because of course your body will essentially do whatever you throw at it. So if you eat regularly throughout the day, you will get used to eating regularly throughout the day. And on top of that, if you are trying to eat healthy, I think it's less sustainable to be able to cook, prepare and eat 6 or 7 healthy meals every day. And then
I know you probably see on Instagram and things, people with their like meal prepping for like the week ahead.
Well, it looks like a week. It's probably just one day.
Probably
it's
one
like 7
day.
Tupperwares.
Well, I mean, who's got time to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But if we think that that is a mantra that's been around for decades now, about eating little and often is a good regime, whatever the rationale behind it is, obviously the society and the food production has all been centered around that. So why do we think we've got ready access to food on the go everywhere?
Yeah.
So we can always get hold of something to eat. Whether it's a flapjack or whether it's a frappe or whatever it is, whether it's food or drink, you constantly can have a supply anywhere. Whether it's a supermarket, a food outlet, petrol station, vending machine. You don't have to go very far before you can get hold of something. And what it doesn't do, I think, is get people accustomed to having an empty stomach, being used to being properly hungry, physiologically hungry. It's not just a psychological thing. Oh well, I haven't had anything to eat for the last 2 hours, I better have a snack. Or it's an opportunistic thing. Oh well, those cakes are going around the office, I'll grab them now because it's been a couple of hours since breakfast. Or I've got lunch is not going to be for whatever, it's for another 2 hours. It's just sort of that habit forming. But it's a problem, isn't it? And I think this is why when you do an intervention like time restricted feeding, it really does change people's behaviour. Because it forces people to actually look at, and that's what most diets do. That's how most diets are effective. You can make up any rule you want, but if it makes people conscious of what they're eating and change their behaviour beneficially, then it works.
Long term as well.
But you need something that's long term, that someone can buy into and that they can sustain forever. So I think time restricted feeding has the potential to do that. I don't think, like anything, you have to be massively religious about it.
No, absolutely not.
I don't think you have to be a zealot with these types of things. I think you just incorporate the philosophy of it into what you're normally doing. I think that's how we want everyone to be. That's certainly how I want people to be. I want people to be able to eat the things they want to eat and not feel like they're going to have massive consequences to it or be psychologically beaten up over it. It's about doing everything in moderation, which everybody knows about, but actually doing it in practice is such a challenge.
I think the key with time restricted eating and the 2 meal day is that, like you said, it gives you the tools to listen to your body better and understand your body better, and for your body to actually work more efficiently and use those fuel sources more flexibly. So, like you say, once you've kind of entrained that and you've got used to that, you don't have to necessarily do it every day, but you'll do it whenever you see fit, because you'll have that connection with your body and your mind. And this is why I think it's such a powerful thing. And you did touch on that there, getting used to having an empty stomach. Are we meant to have full stomachs all the time?
Well, not really. I mean, we're not. There's no design feature that says that we have to have a full stomach. If anything, we're designed to have ebbs and flows of diet. I mean, we are still designed evolutionary around feast and famine. That's not to say that we have to go for days on end without any food, but we are designed metabolically to do that. Now we can adjust. It's not like it's fixed in stone and we're still cavemen. We have evolved and we have adjusted, and we do adjust ourselves to the exposure that we're exposed to in terms of diet. So it's not a fixed entity, but it is more like what we're designed to do, to have periods of eating and periods of non-eating, than it is to have a constant supply of eating all the time.
Yeah, so this is one of the main things that people, when they start fasting, is just getting used to that feeling of having an empty stomach. And actually, I'm fasted right now, and it's, you know, part of the reason why I continue to do fasting and the 2 meal day is because I like to get most of my things done in the fastest day, because I feel light, I feel energized. Once I've done what I need to do in the day, then I can go and have my mega meal. I'm going to coin that, the mega meal. So yeah, that's really interesting stuff. So what about, so we've touched on obviously the 2 meal day, we've mentioned it. What, in your opinion, because I started the 2 meal day because I thought, I tried every other intermittent fasting method, and I thought there are great things about it. But I think the 2 meal day is the only one that encourages it to become a way of life, because rather than focusing on the clock, you're focusing on your body and when you feel hungry. I mean, from what what you know about the 2 meal day, would you say the 2 meal day is an effective method to get some of the benefits from time restricted eating?
I would say so. I mean, I think if you were doing it with the ethos of time restricted feeding, or as a manifestation of time restricted feeding by the strictest sense, then you would be doing the same thing every day. So if, let's say, you were taking breakfast out, then you would consistently take breakfast out, because that would just be your time restricted window.
Yeah.
But I think the advantage in a way of doing the 2 meal day is that, yes, it has the underpinnings of time restricted feeding, but it is really more in tune with how, again, observationally, people that are very good at maintaining their weight do anyway.
Yeah.
Because people that are very good at maintaining their weight, and you've probably, maybe the people viewing this know people that you see eating loads of food and never put on an ounce. And you think, how can they eat so much food and yet still be so slim? It's because they probably only had that 1 meal the whole day.
Yeah.
Or they've maybe had loads of food that day but eat hardly anything for the next 2 days.
Exactly.
So, I mean, people are doing that unconsciously all the time. So I think it's a way of in training, like you've said, to get you used to the fact that you're breaking that sort of routine of having to be constantly fed all the time, and just being more intuitive in what you're eating.
Yeah, you're exactly right. People always ask me about my calorie intake, and I don't always count or track, but about every 6 months I'll track for about 2 or 3 weeks just to see what's going on. And the interesting thing is it fluctuates. Some days it's as high as 4,000 calories if I've trained. Sometimes it's as low as 1,800 calories if it's a rest day, but it averages out at exactly what it should be, which is about 2,800 calories, which is roughly what I need for my height, age, sex, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just having that connection and that understanding and that intuitive eating, which is the goal for everyone really, is to be able to intuitively know when you should eat, what you should eat, and which is a great thing. So thank you for condoning the 2 meal day there. So guys, hopefully you've enjoyed what we've been talking about so far. We're about to get to some questions now, so hit like right now if you've been enjoying this and get your question in. We've got some preloaded questions I'm going to go through first, but if I see any pop up, I'll answer those as well. So let's have a look. 1 second, guys. Right, really big question sent in from Anna on my Instagram page. From your experience and your opinion, from in your knowledge, would you say there is a difference between men and women fasting?
Interesting, really interesting question. That I think we don't know for sure, but I think you can speculate that there could be a difference between men and women. Obviously, men and women are not the same for various reasons, and physiologically, physiologically there are distinctions between them. I think There are differences, for example, in glucocorticoid, cortisol metabolism between men and women. There's differences in
the stress hormone, cortisol.
the stress hormone. There's differences in how you deposit and how much body fat you have. There's differences in how you manage fuels, particularly fat around the body. So yes, I think there is. I think to show that from an evidence or a research point of view, I don't think that it's such in its infancy that no one's really purposely looked at individual gender differences in the effects of either, whether it's alternate day fasting or 5-2, or whether it is your 16-8. There is some suggestion that women are a little bit more sensitive to your alternate day fasting and your 5-2, that longer fast, and that maybe there's
sensitive in a bad way.
Yeah, that they are more prone to get some rebound glucose intolerance in response to that, probably because of that difference in cortisol metabolism that you get.
So they'll have higher cortisol from off the back of...
because they're not used to having higher cortisol, because they're much better at managing cortisol normally. Okay. So maybe that elevation of cortisol as a result of that fast might lead to inadvertent glucose intolerance. I mean, that's going back to sort of the evidence, and you have to sort of see a balanced view in it. I mean, intermittent fasting has lots of benefits to it, but there is some underlying risks that we need to be aware of, because there are some observations, particularly from the animal studies and from some human studies, that fasting too severely can be detrimental in terms of glucose. So you might be very good and better at burning fat for a fuel, but the knock-on effect of that is that you might actually be slightly less tolerant to carbohydrates. Now we don't know that, and we haven't seen that borne out properly in humans yet, but it's been suggested from animal studies, because of course in duration of an animal study relative to their lifespan, you can do a much longer term effect. So I've gone off the point there.
But that's
for
men and women. The more extreme.
But I think that's more from the extreme alternate day fast or your 5-2 type approach. But going back to the question about men and women, I think definitely there is, and I think when it comes to looking at when it comes to looking at time restricted feeding or 2 meal day, I think where the difference might be, and what I'll be interested maybe with, and collaboration with you, is to see what is the best approach to that 2 meal day for men and women. And my suspicion might be that what meal you skip might be preferentially one for different for men than it is for women. So maybe for men you might skip breakfast, for women you might skip dinner, or vice versa. So I think that's where it might come out.
So when you say maybe, your hypothesis at the moment is that?
My hypothesis would be that, and that's sort of born from, I've done some research looking at timing of particularly carbohydrate and how that differs around exercise, but I think that same idea around carbohydrate management might manifest as different strategies for your 2 meal day, men and women. But I'd have to explore it. We'd have to look at it. It'd be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, actually, because I have to say most people do decide to skip breakfast, I think, because it's just easier to implement practically, because most people aren't having breakfast meetings every morning. They're more likely to go out for dinner. But the people that do ask me about skipping dinner are usually women. It's usually women who say, I've tried skipping breakfast, it just didn't work. I felt like I was eating more in the evening. Can I skip dinner instead? And absolutely, I think my answer to that question all the time is, which is going to fit into your lifestyle better? Which do you feel better doing? I mean, you obviously kind of said which you think is better for men and women.
I can make a bet if you want.
Yeah.
I can hedge my bets. So if I was a betting man, I would say that for women it's probably better to skip dinner, and for men it's probably better to skip breakfast. If I was going to hedge my bets there. So, and the reason for that is that women are better glucose disposers. They're better at regulating and disposing of glucose.
Or carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates. So, whereas men, they tend to just respond to carbohydrate very acutely. So I think having that having breakfast and lunch for women might be better than having lunch and dinner.
Okay.
Just because I think women are more likely to be overloaded with carbohydrate more than men, so it's probably better to have that overload in the early part of the day,
okay,
rather than later in the day.
Okay, but as it stands, you can't see.
But I don't see any detrimental effects of doing either of those.
Yeah.
For one or the other.
Compared to doing a more extreme version.
No, and again, we haven't got the evidence to say that. But given that time restricted feeding is a less severe form of intermittent fasting, then I think your risks are minimised anyway.
Yeah. So there you go. You heard it here first. So next question is about fasted exercise.
Okay.
I guess it's not really a question. It's like, why didn't you kind of explain the pros and the cons?
Okay.
Well, first of all, what is fasted exercise? And
fasted
the pros
exercise.
And cons?
Well, it's just training low, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it depends who you read or what you're reading about as to what it's defined as. So fasted exercise could be exercising after an overnight fast, so first thing in the morning before you have breakfast or anything to eat. It could be exercising without any prior carbohydrate, so it might be during the day or at the end of the day, but at some period of time after the last meal.
Yeah, so like maybe 8 hours.
Yeah, maybe, or even after, during the post-absorptive period. It could be. Or it could be that you're exercising in a glycogen depleted state. So you might do, and this is going into sort of ways in which you might train. So you might do 2 sessions back to back. So the first session you deplete all your muscle glycogen,
which is your stored carbohydrate.
The store of carbohydrate, and then the second session you're doing in a depleted state.
Yeah.
So it has different manifestations, but the logic behind it is that you are triggering a greater stress response in the muscle because you're exercising in a fuel depleted state, which is sort of forcing or accelerating your body's adaptation to that sort of stress. In other words, creating more mitochondria, increasing blood innovation, and improving basically your ability to take up and burn fat. So from an endurance point of view, and it's really come from endurance training, and it's been done for decades inadvertently with Kenyan runners doing this for many years ago. It's a way of getting better endurance adaptations. So that's important to know, because if you think of it as an endurance adaptation, then that fasted exercise is not really appropriate for all forms of exercise.
Exactly.
Because if your exercise is for the purpose of power or strength, then doing fasted exercise is not necessarily going to give you the benefit that you want. In fact, it might actually give you a detrimental performance, which is actually not giving you your end goal.
Yeah.
So it's not a universal form of exercise.
Exactly.
It's fine for if you wanted to get that endurance trained effect or accelerate that endurance trained effect, but it's not for all.
Yeah.
But if you think of your typical boxer, they usually do their sort of, you think of Rocky when he's out doing his run in that film, first thing in the morning, probably before breakfast, and he comes home and he has his eggs, doesn't he? But that's effectively what boxers have been doing for generations. They've been doing their fasted run in the morning, their endurance exercise in the morning, and then they're doing their sparring and their weights later on in the day. So that's just the way in which they're managing their eating around their exercise.
Yeah, so this is something, if you've read my blog post on fasted exercise, it's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely.
Yes, and absolutely, what I've always said is that fasted exercise does not necessarily mean to more weight loss. There's nothing to suggest that, but it can be a very effective tool to incorporate into your training to potentially make your body more metabolically flexible, so that you're using the right fuel source for the right exercise intensity. And the issue with always eating before training is that you're never going to use your stored energy. You're never getting that metabolic flexibility. But equally, you don't want to only train fasted, because the opposite could potentially happen. You'll get less good at using the carbohydrates that you're eating potentially. Yeah, and it's also about what you feed after the exercise as well as what you feed before the exercise, which is another story. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the
value of exercise shouldn't be underestimated, because if we go back to some of the potentially detrimental effects of intermittent fasting, which might be where you're creating some insulin resistance as a result of suddenly being overwhelmed with fat and having to deal with this fat in the fasted state, when that's what exercise is helping you to do. So it's one thing to deliver more fat to your muscle for the purposes of using it as a fuel, because you haven't got anything else. But you need to be able to break that fuel down and use it. And I think what we see as the long-term effects of just doing intermittent fasting and nothing else is that your muscle becomes overwhelmed and can't cope with that, and you get mitochondrial dysfunction, which might lead to insulin resistance. So it could be doing you as much harm as good. The intermittent fasting, if you don't incorporate some exercise in it. And I'm thinking of your more severe sort of alternate day fasting 5-2 type approach, where you've got prolonged fasted periods. So
is that kind of, would you say that's just a similar danger to following a ketogenic diet long term?
I think so, yeah. I think so. You've got to sort of you've got to do two purposes. It's not just about liberating fat and delivering it to the muscle. Your muscle has to have the capacity to break it down.
So utilise it.
Now, of course, having that presence of lipid in some way helps that adaptation, but you also need other triggers of it. So you have to actually have some means of triggering dissipation of it, some trigger of actually elevating fatty acid oxidation, because you've got elevated energy expenditure, you've got increased physical activity. So it doesn't have to be exercise, but you can't just sit on a couch all day in intermittent fast and expect to have all of the metabolic benefits from it.
That's the thing. It's not a magic pill. Unfortunately, there is no magic pill, but it can be an incredibly effective tool. And I like the way that Damien from 4 Nutrition says this. It's a tool in his performance and body optimization toolbox. It's and in my opinion, obviously incredibly effective. So next question from Stephen Doe. What takes you out of the fasted state? So specifically, does black coffee take you out of the fasted state? Does green tea, herbal tea?
The main thing that's going to transition you away from the fasted state or into the fed state is carbohydrate. To some extent, some amino acids, so presence of protein, lipids not so much, but that's not to say that it's not going to have an effect in other ways. But the reason why green tea and black coffee have a response is that what they'll do is they'll give you a thermogenic response. So
could you describe what that is?
So thermogenic response is that heat generating response. It's what we call the thermic effect of feeding, or diet induced thermogenesis is another form of it. So when you have something that's a rich meal, you get that warming sensation inside. You're generating heat as a byproduct.
I get hot when I eat.
You get hot because you're using energy to digest and absorb that food. And if you think of green tea or coffee, obviously both of those have got caffeine in it. That's a sympathetic driver. So that would elevate your heart rate, that would increase your energy expenditure.
Adrenaline potentially as well.
A little bit of adrenaline. So it's sort of triggering a fight or flight response, but without any fuel. So it's not really transitioning you into the fed state. Green tea has another independent effect on thermogenesis beyond just the sympathetic response. Again,
what's that?
So it's the I can't remember the name of the compound in it, but it has some suggestion of triggering some of the other thermogenic processes in the body. The uncoupling, perhaps.
Well, because they say that green tea is a fat burner, don't they?
Yes, but it is such a subtle effect.
It's not going to be the difference.
It's almost undetectable. I mean, we've done studies on effect of green tea, and it does negligible effects on it. I mean, you might be able to just about detect a difference, but in the grand scheme of things, it's negligible. So you'd have to take loads and loads of it in order to get an effect. And there has other consequences of having lots of green tea, which I wouldn't advocate. But I wouldn't say from a metabolic point of view, not from an energy expenditure point of view, yes, in terms of energy burning, but in terms of transitioning you into the fed state, probably not.
So, put simply, black coffee and green tea will start some thermogenic effects in the body, but that won't necessarily take you out of the fasted state. Equally, actually, what about a splash of milk or almond milk in the coffee or tea? Is that going to take you out of the fastest day?
Well, you see, that's an interesting one. So is there, because we've been trying to look at the dose response, what is the trigger? And so if you take something sweet, tasting sweets, you can get a cephalic response, which is your brain communicates with your gut to say you're just about to have some carbohydrates.
So that's like the response from your mouth.
Yeah, so from a mouthwash point of view, or from a
amylase, is it?
Yeah, it's just triggering the presence of sugar or sweetness in the mouth to prepare you for the delivery or arrival of carbohydrate. And that starts to actually get a trigger of insulin release. Okay. So you get a small amount of insulin released in readiness for that carbohydrate coming on board. Now,
so that's an insulin response without actually food being consumed.
Yeah. Now, is that enough to get you out of the fasted state? I probably would say no, but it has other effects. If you're taking something sweet, then from a brain communication perspective, you're triggering as if you're going to have some fuel.
Yeah.
And then that might have effects in terms of appetite control. So you might actually be hoodwinking your hypothalamus to think that you're going to have some fuel, some nutrients absorbed and circulating around, which might have implications in terms of appetite control. So I don't think unless you have a significant amount. I suppose what is the dose? Maybe a few grams you could get away with
of carbohydrate.
That without you wholesale getting out of the fasted state. But do you want to have that central trigger of as if you're having a meal? That higher center trigger to say that I'm eating, even without anything.
Yeah. So I think it comes down to. I try to tell people not to focus on it too much. If you really want a splash of milk in your coffee and that's going to improve your quality of life, then have it. I would say probably a nut milk over a normal milk because there's going to be less carbohydrate in it.
Well, I wouldn't say that. No? Nut milk's quite a lot of sweeteners in it, isn't it?
Well, obviously, you get the ones without sweeteners.
Okay.
Yeah. That goes without saying, guys. No sweeteners in your nut milk. But yeah, certainly, if you're adding sugar into your tea or coffee, that will certainly take you out of the fastest state. I mean, and that's probably, if you are looking to reduce your sugar consumption, that's the first place it can go from because it's completely unnecessary. That's you actually adding in sugar yourself. So yeah, that's a really, really good answer. Thank you. Just going to have a look to see if we've got any comments. Scroll down. It's very difficult for me to see the whole thing. One second, guys. Oh. Okay, sorry guys, we almost lost you there. Okay, one second, guys. Let's have a look. Is it managed any kind of intake will trigger your brain to switch your body out of fat burning mode? So this looks like an okay question. So from Annie Humphreys, it is my understanding that any calorific intake will trigger your brain to switch your body out of fat burning mode. But can you still benefit from all the other positive effects on your body? So I think what she's asking is because there's like a lot of kind of bro science going around saying that as long as you have less than 30 calories, it's okay.
Right.
What do you think of that? I mean, we've kind of just answered that.
Yeah, I think we've answered that. I don't think it's to do with the calories per se. I think it's to do with the presence of carbohydrate. I mean, whether lipids. I mean, people are thinking about fat bombs to have for breakfast.
Oh, what the bulletproof coffee?
Bulletproof coffee, yeah.
Which certainly takes you out the fastest state.
Yeah. So I think the idea is you're not supposed to be trying to cheat the system here. It's not about what is a quick fix.
How can I get away with this?
How can I get away with this? Or what product can I buy that sort of bypasses some of the rules that I've been trying to instill on me? The ethos about it is to not have to go into all of this detail. It's trying to give you freedom. That's the whole idea. So
exactly.
You're You're not
Exactly.
supposed to think, oh, can I have that because it's got this amount of carbohydrate in it? It's about, you know, being intuitive of what you're eating, being flexible.
Exactly.
I mean, that's trying to get you to be metabolically flexible, but it's also trying to get you to be behaviourally flexible as well.
I actually spoke about this yesterday, is that intermittent fasting shouldn't restrict your life, it should optimize your life. So if you're kind of sitting there stressing about like, oh, can I get away with this, can I get away with that, you know, you're focusing on the wrong things. But as we've kind of just cleared up, a little bit of milk or unsweetened almond milk in your coffee or tea won't necessarily negate all the benefits from fasting. So so another question that we get asked a lot is, so we're going to answer 2 more questions, guys. The one preloaded and one from you guys. So make sure you keep asking. Will you lose muscle when you're following time? Let's focus on time restricted eating and 2 meal a day. Is, you know, as soon as you extend your fast, will your body start instantly tapping into muscle as a form of energy?
No, it won't instantly turn into it, because what are you effectively doing? You're only extending that fasted period for a few hours. It's not going to be in a completely catabolic state like you would if you're adapting to starvation, which is, you know, 24 plus hours.
Yeah.
So yes, you're going to have some turnover of amino acids. They're going to be contributing, as they always do, to the fuel mix, and they might start contributing or oxidizing a little bit more. But it's not like going to be a wholesale shifting of amino acids and funneling them to your liver to produce carbohydrate because you've run out of fuel.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of people, my guess would be that even by the end of their fasted period, they'll still have some carbohydrate left in their glycogen stores in their liver. It's not like they're going to be completely at zero.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be in that purely catabolic state. So I would say that you're not going to run that risk.
But also, why would that happen if you've got this stored energy in the form of fat there?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're doing it because you need to be able to produce the carbohydrate, which you can't produce from fat.
Okay.
So if you're doing a ketogenic type diet, then you have to manufacture that carbohydrate from somewhere else. So yes, you can supplement the need by producing ketones, but you still have to have a steady supply of carbohydrate. And that primary source of that is going to be from amino acids and some glycerol, but it's going to be triggering muscle as a precursor for glucose.
I think, you know, fundamentally, as long as you're still eating roughly the same amount of calories and you're not under eating over time, then you won't tap into muscle. I mean, you guys have seen from my personal transformations in the past 6 months, when I started basically lifting heavy things, I put on 4 or 5 kilograms of muscle at the same time as eating less protein and fasting on top of that. But what happened was, because I intermittent fast and because I'm metabolically, or my body is responsive to what's going on, my hunger levels skyrocketed when I started lifting. So I ate more of those 2 meals. So, you know, you can put on muscle and fast at the same time, and you won't necessarily, you know, negate, you know, guys in particular are really scared of losing their gains. But fundamentally, to get muscle, it's what you're doing in your training and how much you're eating, and it's less important of like when you're eating that food.
Yeah, but it is about timing as well. I mean, if you're doing your heavy weightlifting in early morning in the middle of your fasted period and then not having anything to eat for another 4 hours afterwards, then you're running the risk of creating that sort of trigger of muscle breakdown, and without supplying the amino acids for when you're triggering muscle synthesis. Well, you're not doing that because you're obviously timing it to...
Well, I do actually do that quite a lot.
Do you? Yeah. Okay. But I suppose you are having your big meal at least at some point during that 24-hour period.
So
you're having it in the lunch and the dinner of that day.
Yeah. So I'll wake up in the morning and I'll probably do a 2-hour weightlifting session at around 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock, and then I'll break my fast at around lunchtime, 12 o'clock.
Okay, so that's only a few hours.
Yeah.
And it's not like that anabolic window suddenly disappears forever. Yeah. It goes on for 24 hours afterwards. So
Yeah, that's actually, why don't we kind of just quickly talk about that, the anabolic window.
The magic window.
Yeah, that is like, you have to consume your protein shake within half an hour, otherwise you're going to die.
Yeah, I have to take it in the changing room before I get changed.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes me laugh. That it's a fallacy, really, because it's a great marketing ploy for people that want to sell you protein shakes, because it's a way of saying, oh, you need to get it. And the only way you can get it is by having a protein shake, because practically you won't be able to take it in any other form.
Yeah.
And you need extra because you're doing all this extra work, and protein is needed for muscle, and therefore you to be big you need more protein. It's all a big marketing scam.
There we go. You heard it here. I've said it before, but you've heard it from the professional himself.
Yeah, that anabolic window doesn't just disintegrate into nothing after 2 hours, or after an hour, or after half an hour. It lasts for a long period of time.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So can we grab the laptop, Neil? We're going to answer one more question from you guys, but I can't see it on the mobile. So let's as long as we've got some intelligent questions, and preferably not from my dad who's watching asking questions.
Not too intelligent.
Potentially Moyan.
It's not really to do with fasting. Okay, I guess we can answer this. Okay, last question. This is from Moyan, and Moyan is very supportive of us. We're going to answer your question. In your kind of a bit separate from intermittent fasting, but I guess we can tie it into. Is it essential to count macronutrients?
That's a good question. I think that is where the future of all this is going, I think. And that's particularly an area of interest of mine. I wouldn't say it's necessarily about counting macros and having this magic ratio of carbohydrate to protein to fat. But I definitely think that macronutrient manipulation is a way of actually creating the scenario of time-restricted feeding without actually time-restricted feeding.
Okay, that's interesting. So something like the fasting mimicking diet,
So the fasting mimicking diet, or just manipulating the timing of carbohydrate or the carbohydrate content of meals, is a way in which you could possibly do it. Which, if it can mirror some of those effects, means that you can get the benefits of doing something like skipping breakfast without actually skipping breakfast.
Yeah. So this is, as you say, this is the future. There's a lot of research and interest in this at the moment. Is eliciting the same response of fasting without actually fasting. Yeah. I would argue that I think fasting's easy, so why don't you do it? But for a lot of people, it's not going to be realistic.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not. It's more about not mimicking the effects of fasting, but it's perhaps improving some of the same things that you get improved with fasting.
Yeah.
So getting those same effects, which is basically how well you are able to manage that meal that you're taking. Perhaps you can improve that by just carb cycling throughout that 24-hour day.
Okay.
I think that's the area I'm particularly interested in pursuing with my new PhD student.
There we go. That's exciting stuff. So guys, thank you very much for listening. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to send them to me. Hopefully I can try and answer them, or I could potentially ask Adam at a later date. For more information about the 2 Meal Day, make sure you head over to 2mealday.com. But Adam, thank you so much for talking to us.
Sorry for blinding you there with Garden.
Oh no, I love talking to you because I listen to myself talk, I read, and I understand it in my head, but then listening to you, it makes me understand everything obviously even better and see it in new ways. And I really love talking with you. So
Pleasure.
Thanks very much, Adam, and thanks you guys for watching. I'll see you soon.